What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. Last week, obviously, we did another college football and NFL recap as we continue on through the college football and NFL seasons. That's what we're going to continue to do on this channel, and let's just say it's shaping up to be a crazy finish in college football, that's for sure, especially after this past weekend. We're going to go over some of the games, and then I'll go over the four main games that at least were most impactful to me, and obviously I'll give my thoughts and opinions on those said games and those upsets that happened over this past weekend. As you all know, obviously it is November 5th, and it is also Election Day. Make sure y'all go out and vote. It's an important day, very, very important day, and everybody who knows me knows who I'm voting for. Nobody can tell me otherwise. Because it's my opinion, I'm entitled to it. And if you're going to vote based off of hate, well, I feel sorry for you. But either way, we're not going to get into politics on this channel. We're going to talk politics another day, probably after the election. I don't know. I'll either be happy or I'll be pissed off. So we'll see. Apologize. But today, we got another college football recap and another NFL recap, and we're going to get right into it right after this. Obviously, you all know I'm a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32. Get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. So without delaying any further, let's get into this past weekend of college football. So obviously, heading into November, that's when the College Football Playoff Committee finally makes their selections. Everybody who watches football knows this. And now with the 12-team playoff, it seems like there's a lot more parity in college football this year, at least. I can't think of a single team that is truly dominant. It's not like a 2016 Alabama or Clemson team. It's not like those teams. There's not a single powerhouse in college football right now that realistically looks unstoppable. Every single team, at least towards the top, and obviously every single team in the country has shown that, they're not invincible. They're not otherworldly dominant. They all have their flaws, and that's what I love about college football this year so much. There is not one definitive college football program out there that you can definitively say is perfect all the way around. It's not like the 2011 Alabama team where they had like 7 first-round picks on the defensive side and a boatload of running backs and wide receiving talent on the offensive side led by A.J. McCarron. It's like it's not like the 2001 Hurricanes where there's 31 first-round draft picks on the entire team and otherworldly talents like Andre Johnson, Jonathan Vilma, Vince Wilfork, etc., Ed Reed, Sean Taylor. Like, the list goes on and on and on. But that's what makes college football so great right now. And that's why I realistically cover mainly college football, is because I think there's just so much parity in college football, and it's not taking away anything from the game. Like, I still love the NFL, but compared to college football, there is really no comparison. The best sport in the world is college football. I'll go to my grave saying that because the NFL is so predictable. At least, and I get it. At the beginning of this year, we had a couple upsets, like the Saints going into Dallas and putting up 40 on them. There's a bunch of teams out there that end up making their mark some way, somehow. There's always parity, and there's not much parity in the NFL when it comes to the top and the bottom of the league. The Raiders still suck. The Panthers still suck. The Browns still suck. Like, the teams that usually suck and have usually been terrible over the past 10 to 15 years, it's basically stayed the same. College football changing every single week and every single year. That's why college football is so much fun. So without delaying any more, let's get into the past weekend of college football games. So some of them I'm going to go over. So obviously, number 15, Boise State, 56, San Diego State University 24, behind Ashton Genty's immaculate performance, over 100 rushing yards again. Boise State has such a good chance to represent the group of 5 schools in the college football playoff, and I fully expect them to. There's only two other group of 5 schools right now that I would even consider putting in ahead of Boise, and that's if a couple things lined up, and that's Army and that's UNLV. Other than that, there's no real other group of 5 school that has shown anything of note that would be worthy of them to get that 12th seed in the college football playoff. Number 1, Oregon beats the brakes off of Michigan 38-17 in the Big House. So Michigan has obviously struggled this year mightily, and they're one of the most disappointing teams in college football. In a little bit, after I go over some of the games in the top 10 in the Power Index and the Playoff Predictor, I'm going to tell you my top 3 most disappointing teams of college football this year, and I think realistically everybody would agree with them, and Michigan is one of them. I believe they're now 4-5 on the year. Yeah, 4-5, 4-4, whatever. I think it's 4-5, but lack of quarterback play, lack of discipline at the quarterback position. Donovan Edwards is basically a no-show right now. When everybody was hyping him up to be one of the best running backs in college football, he's not even in contention for any awards right now. He's not even in any of the top newsreels in America right now when it comes to college football and the running back position. That goes to Ashton Genty. That goes to a bunch of other running backs like Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State, Travion Henderson from Ohio State. You know, there's just Donovan Edwards should be talked about more because he's a phenomenal player, and I thought he would have been a first-round draft pick in this upcoming NFL draft, but right now the way Michigan is playing, they're horrible, and they are regressing terribly. Last year's national champions, they are looking absolutely awful this year. Number 2, Georgia narrowly beats Florida 34-20. So Georgia, through this entire game, that final score does not reflect that game. Carson Beck had 3 interceptions in the first half. 3. Against, while not a terrible Florida defense, it still isn't that great. It's not like an Alabama defense or an Ohio State defense or Texas or Tennessee or Oregon. Like those, it's not otherworldly. And yet Florida, for the most part, if DJ Lagway doesn't get hurt and leave the game with an injury, I'm thoroughly convinced that Florida probably upsets Georgia in this game. Up until like 4 to 5 minutes left in that entire game, Florida was in striking position to win that game. But you're down to a third-string quarterback who has never really taken any meaningful snaps other than against Samford earlier in the year. And Samford, come on, like that's not real snaps. Like we know what real playing time is. Like that's just garbage time. I get it. Experience is experience, and he had none for this game in this moment. So literally, imagine yourself. You're the third-string quarterback. Obviously, you're going into this game as a backup because starting quarterback Graham Mertz goes down with an injury, done for the year. Now it looks like DJ Lagway will miss extended periods of time during the rest of this season because of his injury. And now in comes a third-string quarterback for Florida. You know, you're asking him to step into arguably the biggest game that he'll ever play in his life. And if he's going to be the starter going forward for Florida, maybe in a couple years or whatever, after Lagway either transfers or is in the NFL, you know, he's going to be playing Georgia again. That's a rivalry year in and year out. So I don't think Georgia's all that cracked up to be. I think that was a pathetic performance by Carson Beck, especially in the first half. Everybody hypes up Georgia, but Carson Beck has not been playing well at all against the bigger schools. He struggled against Alabama, obviously. He struggled against Kentucky. They're not that great of a team. And they struggled against Florida, a Florida team that everybody thought was going to only win 2 games this year. So I'm not impressed with Georgia. Number 7, Tennessee handles Kentucky 28-18. Kentucky they're a scrappy 3-5 team. They're very scrappy. Indiana, number 13, Indiana, 47, Michigan State 10. Indiana's leading is up there with Oregon at the top of the Big Ten right now. Obviously, that's going to sort itself out when they play Ohio State in a few weeks. Number 9, I think it's 19 or 14. Sorry. Ole Miss beats Arkansas 63-31. Jackson Dart threw for over 500 yards in this game, which was unreal. So Army 20, Air Force 3. Quarterback Bryson Daly for Army did not play this game. It shows on the scoreboard because Bryson Daly's actually, I think, number 6 or 7 in the Heisman voting right now, an Army quarterback. Let's just get that out of the way. And he's an animal. He's built literally different. He's so fast, so strong. You know, hey, salute the service members. They got athletes, that's for sure. Texas Tech upsets number 11 Iowa State 23-22. So Iowa State effectively is, you know, they're not completely out of the playoff picture, but it's very slim pickings around for the 12-team playoff. It's very slim. The margins are so small that you can't afford to mess up. And that's my worry for a lot of teams going forward. So Texas Tech upsets Iowa State 23-22. SMU, number 20 SMU, 48, put belt to ass to Pitt 48-25. And now SMU hops Clemson and is now second in the ACC behind the Hurricanes. And now all signs are pointing to an SMU Miami Hurricanes ACC championship after Clemson's lost to Louisville. But we'll talk about them in a little bit. Number 17, Kansas State got upset by Houston 24-19. So now Kansas State effectively is more than likely out of the college football playoff projections. They're more than likely out of the playoff mix. They still hold the tiebreaker over Colorado, even though Colorado is making waves, and I think that that's a dangerous team to play right now if you're in the Big 12. But we'll see. So those are the couple games I just wanted to get through. And now we're going to get into the real games. Number 5, Miami versus Duke, the homecoming of old head coach for Miami, Manny Diaz. Miami won 53-31. Early on in this game, it was clear that this was going to be a dogfight. Even though Miami took a 14-point lead, I knew deep down as a Miami fan, it's usually too good to be true when it comes to that sort of situation, because Duke, if there's a list, there's like 3 teams in the ACC year in and year out that always give Miami fits, that always give Miami their absolute best, even if they're a horrible team. That's Duke, that's North Carolina, and that's Georgia Tech. Those 3 have always been a thorn in the Hurricanes' side. So early on, obviously, Duke ended up taking a lead and realistically held control over that game for at least until upwards of 8 minutes left in the third quarter. But then after that, it was all Miami. Cam Ward finished the day with 400 yards passing and 5 touchdowns. And Xavier Restrepo ended up getting over 140 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, and now is the all-time leader in the Hurricanes program's history in receptions and receiving yards. Think about that. The University of Miami, at least back then, considered wide receiver U. Michael Irvin, Randall Hill, Lamar Thomas, Santana Moss, Reggie Wayne, Andre Johnson, Darryl Jones, and into the later years, Travis Benjamin, Alan Hearns, Philip Dorsett. There are Braxton Berrios. There's a lot of great wide receivers that have come through that program, and especially the programs of old. Obviously, in more modern history, more recent memory, Miami hasn't necessarily had that dominant receiver. I believe Amon Richards could have been. Anybody who remembers that guy from Miami knows what I'm talking about and how special he really was as an athlete. But looking back, I've mentioned all the great receivers that Miami has had over the years. Xavier Restrepo is now the leader of all of them in receptions and in receiving yards. I think it's thoroughly impressive that you can go to a program with legends, all-time NFL talent, like Michael Irvin, Andre Johnson, Santana Moss, Reggie Wayne, and you lead them all. You beat them all in yards and receptions. That's impressive. So Xavier Restrepo smashes the Miami record for receiving yards and receptions, and now Cam Ward has tied Steve Walsh with 29 passing touchdowns on the year. And more than likely, Cam Ward is going to break that next game or the game after, continuously going forward. Cam Cam Ward has already enshrined himself in Miami history, at least for the quarterback position. And going forward, we'll see how it goes. My main concern for the Hurricanes going forward is their defense. They have the best offense in football. I know people are going to call me a Miami homer. I know people are going to say my opinion is biased because I'm a Hurricane fan. And you could say that all you want. I watch college football probably more than most people think. I know college football. I've called it a bunch of times over this year in big games that everybody said, you're an idiot, you're crazy. Guess what? I know what I'm talking about when it comes to college football. I don't know as much as Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit. I would love to work with those guys one day. But I know more than people think I do. And I knew for a fact Duke would have took Miami. They would have gave them their all. Duke's head coach is Manny Diaz, the head coach that was fired by Miami in favor of Mario Cristobal coming in. What does that tell you? Like, if Duke was going to play with a little bit more fight and passion than usual, it would have been for their head coach in his homecoming to Miami. But wasn't meant to be. The Hurricanes 9-0 for the first time since 2017. They beat the Duke Blue Devils 53-31 and have firm control of first place in the ACC right now. All right, the big noon kickoff game. Ohio State 20, number 4, Ohio State 20, number 3, Penn State 13. Okay, this is the 8th straight year that Ohio State has beaten Penn State. Is James Franklin really still the guy that should be coaching Penn State? I remember the last time Penn State beat Ohio State off a blocked field goal returned for a touchdown in the late minutes of the fourth quarter to upset the Buckeyes. That's the last time Penn State beat Ohio State. Back in 2016, it's ridiculous that James Franklin I think he's the best head coach that always chokes. I will give him credit because I'm pretty sure he averages like 10 wins a season at Penn State, but when it comes down to it, this man cannot win the big game. He's won the Big Ten one time. And he went to the Rose Bowl against Sam Darnold's led USC Trojans, and that was a masterclass. That was one of the best college football games I've ever seen in my life. But either way, James Franklin continuously fails in these big-time games. It's the same problem that a lot of people have with Coach Ryan Day. Yeah, he beats Penn State. Ohio State has owned Penn State even before Ryan Day started coaching there. So that's not news. That's not new at all. Ryan Day has the same problem, that he can't beat anybody in the top 5. Well, now he obviously did because it's Penn State. Penn State did not have an offensive touchdown in this game. And Ohio State, well, they finally figured out their run game. They bounced back after a horrendous performance last week against Nebraska. But Ohio State, 179 rushing yards on the day as a team collectively. So they ended up solving their run game. But it only amounted to 20 points. But again, Penn State has a decent defense, and they always play the Ohio State Buckeyes scrappy. But Penn State had 0 offensive touchdowns. Their only touchdown came off of a Will Howard pick 6. That's it. And they took an early 10-0 lead. But I knew deep down, nobody was shocked that Ohio State came back. What really bothers me is this play right here. On a 4th and goal, going in to possibly tie the game with 5 minutes left in the game, this is what Penn State runs.
1. Aller looking in the end zone, incomplete. Ohio State holds once again.
Really? You're going with a stupid-ass pass play like that over the middle of the field on a 4th and goal when the strength of the Buckeyes is their interior line and their interior defense? You look around this entire play. That whole middle of the field is crowded. There's nowhere to throw that football. There's nowhere to go with that football. And why you're bringing a lineman in motion, very original. Who do you think you are, the Detroit Lions? No, the Penn State Nittany Lions in Sad Valley now. That was the worst play call on a 4th and goal I've probably ever seen in my life. You're going in to tie the game. You know Ohio State has been running the ball down your throats all day. They've been managing the clock well. You know, all Ohio State had to do was just run out the clock, and that's exactly what they did. They ran it down Penn State's throats and just dared them to stop it, and Penn State couldn't. So Penn State falls short to the Buckeyes again for the 8th year in a row off of a terrible, terrible 4th down play on the goal line going into tie. That was the worst 4th down play I think I've ever seen in my entire life to try and tie a game. And this is why Penn State plays second fiddle to the Buckeyes each and every single year. Next game we're going to talk about, South Carolina upsets number 10 Texas A&M 44-20. This was one of my favorite games that I was looking forward to because Texas A&M, they were riding high in the SEC. They were number 1 in the SEC standings, 5-0 in conference play for the first time in program history since joining the SEC. Now this was going to be a true test going on the road to South Carolina, mainly because South Carolina has probably the best defensive line and best defensive front in all of college football. I know they're 5-3, but that defense is something special. Realistically, if you think about it, South Carolina was within a field goal of beating Alabama. They should have beat Alabama. There's a lot that South Carolina, like, they could be an undefeated team. This should be a top team in the SEC, and honestly, going forward, they might be looking into next year and the years after because of their quarterback, Lenore Sellers. So Sellers, he did good. He had over 200 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. But what really stood out to me was Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders. They both combined for 250 rushing yards against Texas A&M. That ain't going to get it done if you're A&M. I think South Carolina's defense, that is one of the toughest places to play in all of college football. I'll go to my grave saying that. I know it's not looked at as the top. It's not looked at like a night game in Penn State. It's not looked like a night in Austin when you play the Longhorns. It's not the shoe of Ohio State. But South Carolina, with the team they have right now, that's a dangerous place to play, especially at night. And they upset number 10 Texas A&M. And a lot of people thought Texas A&M may have been frauds. I wouldn't go as far as to say they're frauds, but I would say that they're a little overvalued. Quarterback situation necessarily isn't the best when it comes to Texas A&M. Connor Wigman didn't get the start. Marcel Reed did, and I thought Marcel Reed didn't necessarily play too bad, but he could have always played better. Realistically, this was a game up until a few minutes after halftime. Then South Carolina just blew the doors off. So Texas A&M gets upset by South Carolina, and in bludgeoning fashion, 44-20. One final game we're going to get into. The Louisville Cardinals go on the road to number 11 Clemson and beat the Tigers 33-21. So, when it comes to the ACC, people have been dogging Miami because they've played nobody, even though half the people who want to run their mouths to me about that don't understand college football, don't watch college football, and don't understand that Louisville, that's the best 5-3, 6-3 team probably in the ACC. Their only big loss was to Miami. Miami ended up beating Louisville. Clemson couldn't, and Clemson was at home. Miami had to go to Louisville. So everybody, all the big analysts, and this was my bone to pick with them, everybody wanted to talk about Miami's paper soft schedule and skidding by. Well, what about Clemson now? What's their excuse? What's their excuse? I want everybody to keep that same energy towards the Clemson Tigers, who everybody was writing off Miami just because Clemson was getting hot at the right time. They had a home game against Louisville, and they blew it. They did not play well whatsoever. At least that defense for Louisville stopped Phil Maffa on so many 3rd and shorts and 4th and shorts. That was a masterclass by the Louisville defensive line. So Isaac Brown for Louisville had 151 yards rushing, and Phil Maffa for Clemson had 171 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, and yet they still lost by 12 points. Louisville ran all over Clemson. And that's what's funny to me is that everybody wanted to call Miami's schedule paper soft, whereas Clemson was getting hot at the right time and they were winning these games. I told everybody weeks ago that they did not play well against Florida State. Miami ended up beating the brakes off Florida State, but everybody does because Florida State's 1-8 now. But looking back at it, Clemson did not necessarily look great on the road going to Tallahassee. They did not play against Florida State that well. It was not a good day for Clemson, even though they won the game sort of convincing fashion. But you fast forward to this game, look what happens when they play an actual competent team. Louisville handled Clemson. They really did. And, you know, this is a big indictment on a lot of people who were hyping up Clemson. I told everybody, I thought Clemson was a good team. I was giving them credit. I was. They were in my top 10 for the majority of the past 4 to 5 weeks. They've been in my top 10. But to put on a performance like this, I don't want to hear any Miami slander in the ACC when it comes to it because of what just happened with Louisville. Miami went on the road to Louisville and beat them straight up. Louisville walked into Death Valley and put belt to ass to Clemson. That's what happened. So Clemson, number 11 Clemson, falls 33-21 to the Louisville Cardinals, almost effectively keeping them out of the ACC championship and nearly possibly the college football playoff. So obviously it's Tuesday, so the college football playoff rankings could come out tonight. But I will go over the AP top 10 from the previous week. So the new AP top 10 after everything that happened over this past weekend: Oregon at 1, Georgia at 2, Ohio State 3, Miami 4, Texas 5, Penn State 6, 7 Tennessee, Indiana at 8, BYU at 9, and 10 Notre Dame. So now it's time for another installment of Lako's List. Here's where I'll give you my top 10 in college football, and it's switched around slightly, and there's only one team that is not in my top 10 that is in the AP top 10. Oregon at 1, Ohio State at 2, Georgia at 3. I switched those two because Ohio State's defense is actually unreal, and Georgia didn't convince me whatsoever. That was a terrible win against Florida's third-string quarterback, and realistically, they still could have lost that game with said third-string quarterback. So Oregon at 1, Ohio State at 2, Georgia at 3, Miami at 4, Texas 5, Tennessee 6, Penn State 7, 8 Indiana, 9 BYU, 10, I'm not putting Notre Dame, I'm putting Boise State. I'll show respect for Ashton Genty and the Bucking Broncos, that's for sure. So that's my top 10. I don't think Notre Dame is a top 10 team. I don't. At all. So I'm going to put Boise State up there. And I switched Penn State and Tennessee's rankings around just because of the way Penn State looked. Penn State looked horrible. Offense looked inept. It was awful. And Ohio State's defense is really good. So I'll give them a little bit of leeway. Still in the top 10. However, hanging on by a string. And more than likely not going to the Big Ten championship game. All right, so now we're going on the All-State Playoff Predictor. So I'm going to go over some of this. Obviously, Selection Day is today. The first college football playoff rankings are finally released after today. So the highest possibility and the highest percentage chances to get into the college football playoff, there's 4 teams in the 90% category right now, and there's one in the 80s. And then there's a plethora of, there's 4 more in the 70% percentile. So Oregon has the highest percentage right now at 96% chance. Then followed by the Hurricanes, 93%. Georgia at 92, Ohio State at 91. So realistically, those 4 teams are more than likely going to be in the college football playoff. Followed by Indiana at 87%, Texas 78, Tennessee 74, Penn State 74, and Boise State 71. So when you look at everything shaping up and how it's supposed to be right now, obviously those teams that I just rattled off, they're more than likely going to the college football playoff, except a few, just because the SEC, I said it was going to be a dogfight. So obviously there's room for error for a lot of teams. There's room for error for every single team on here. So 58% you have BYU. Now you're getting into the possibly can make it. 58% BYU, Notre Dame, Alabama's in 50. Then you got 47%, you got SMU, you got Ole Miss, Iowa State, LSU getting into the 20s now, Army, Texas A&M. And now you're getting to the 14 and below percentage. You got Kansas State, Colorado, Tulane, Pittsburgh, and UNLV. So realistically, I can see the first 6 teams I mentioned, Oregon, Miami, Georgia, Ohio State, Indiana, and Texas. I can realistically still seeing all those guys going to the college football playoff. And I can also put money on it that Boise State is going to also. The way Ashton Genty is playing, obviously you need to be able to run the ball, but you also need to be able to pass it and have a consistent passing attack. Madsen for Boise, he's okay, but he's not an otherworldly quarterback. He's not Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. I've come around on Shedeur Sanders. I really have. How fun would it be to see Shedeur and Cam Ward in the college football playoff? I think that would be absolute cinema. And that's going to wrap up for the college football section of our channel. So now we're going to get into a little bit about the NFL. Obviously not too much, but I really wanted to dive into college football today just because the playoff rankings come out tonight, and I look forward to every second about it. So now, let's talk about a couple things that happened in the NFL. Anthony Richardson, starting quarterback for the Colts, was benched in favor of Joe Flacco. This is all because last week, I really wanted to talk about this, but after I released my episode, this came out, and I was so mad because I really wanted to talk about it. But when it comes to Anthony Richardson, last week he pulled himself out of a game because he said he was tired. If you're going to, you got to lie at that point. If you are a football player, no way on earth does anybody say that. I've never said it. None of my teammates have ever said it. Nobody I know who plays football says that. Buddy, if you're going to check yourself out of a game, can you please at least lie and say you feel like you pulled a hamstring or something? That is the most asinine answer you could ever give to a reporter. Your teammates probably don't respect you whatsoever. And now in comes Joe Flacco. Obviously, they lost to the Vikings, but I think Joe Flacco over Anthony Richardson, I feel like Joe Flacco gives them the best chance to win. Anthony Richardson sucks in the pocket. I think Richardson is completing like 46% of his throws. That's the worst in the NFL by a country mile. By anybody with reasonable amount of snaps and starts. Richardson is so raw, but that's what 14 starts in college will do for you when he played at the University of Florida. That's what that minimal amount of starts will do for you in your NFL career, apparently. You know, I don't know. I'm not a quarterback. I never have been, and I never will be. But I talked about how important reps are in college also. You know, you mature as you are starting in college long enough. That's why I feel like Bo Nix is going to be so good, because he has over 60 starts in his college career. You can't beat that. You can't beat experience. Experience will beat raw talent every single time. And I think you can apply that to life. Experience in a given field will give you an edge over someone maybe who's just talented but not taking advantage of that said talent. And right now, Anthony Richardson is benched for Joe Flacco. And do I think it's because of the comment he made? Partially. Because as coaches, I feel like you don't want guys leading your locker room that are like that, who are in an important game, and you take yourself out on a goal line situation because you're tired. No, I don't buy that. And I also think Joe Flacco is just a better quarterback than Anthony Richardson. So effectively, Anthony Richardson is going to probably who knows? He might have to pull a Bryce Young and just sit on the bench a little bit and probably end up at a different NFL team. We'll see. So the Lions ended up continuing their dominance over the Green Bay Packers this past weekend. I know that the running backs don't lead the NFL in rushing. I know that's Derrick Henry. But obviously, we all know Baltimore has the best running attack. Between Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, that's unstoppable. But when you look at the offensive line of Detroit, they bully everybody. They show no mercy when it comes to their play on the football field. I think the Lions are going to bruise their way to the Super Bowl this year out of the NFC. And I think, obviously, I watch Colin Cowherd on The Herd week in and week out. I love his show. He always releases the Herd hierarchy in his top team. He said he's keeping, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago he said he was keeping the Chiefs at number 1 until they get beat. No, I wouldn't even do that now, just because I feel like today, if Detroit played Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, I think they beat them probably by 15-20. Mahomes is not playing good. Mahomes is not a good quarterback this year. He's still the best quarterback in crunch time. Make that make sense. I don't get it. The Chiefs, there's no reason they should be undefeated whatsoever. And the Cowboys fall to 3-5 on the year after taking a L to the Atlanta Falcons. This is what you get for paying a man $60 million a year and not making a single phone call to any skill position players whatsoever. Your defense is atrocious. All you have is CeeDee Lamb. Micah Parsons doesn't even show up in big games. I don't even see him make any big-time sacks when it's crunch time. You know who does? Myles Garrett. You know who does? TJ Watt. The legit, true elite pass rushers in the NFL. Do I still think Micah Parsons is fantastic? Yes. But he's got to shape up. This defense is horrible. Mike McCarthy, realistically, probably should be fired. I'm not one to call people's jobs out, but it's probably time for him to go. It is. And honestly, Dallas, you're screwed either way just because of how much money you're paying Dak Prescott. That man got the bag and proceeded not to play good football whatsoever. So Dallas, their playoff hopes are slim after falling 3-5 now. So to finish off the show today, I'm going to give you my Super Bowl bubble. I have 6 teams in my Super Bowl bubble. Teams I think if you put them in the Super Bowl, they can win right now. And then I have 5 teams on the outskirts where they need maybe one addition at the trade deadline or just need a lucky break to go their way, but can compete for a Super Bowl. So inside my Super Bowl bubble, you got the Lions, the Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, the Vikings, and the Eagles. And outside the bubble, I got the Texans, 49ers, Steelers, Atlanta, the Falcons, and the Packers. Obviously, Atlanta and the Falcons, we get that. But I have 5 teams on the outside looking in, and I have 6 teams inside. And I think realistically, you can make a case for all these teams to possibly win the Super Bowl. But obviously, inside the bubble, the Lions, because of their bruising run game, and Jared Goff is playing great football. The Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, that's it. Buffalo, Josh Allen. That's it. Josh Allen. The Ravens, Lamar Jackson, that play calling for the offense, and Derrick Henry. That offense is so fantastic, and they have the worst pass defense in the NFL too, so they're going to be in shootouts. The Vikings, Kevin O'Connell at head coach, and Sam Darnold's, I think he's the right quarterback for that system, and Justin Jefferson, obviously. And then the Eagles, as much as they've struggled, I'll give the nod to Saquon Barkley, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Smith with Jalen Hurts any day of the week, even though I'm not a big fan of Nick Sirianni. And that's going to wrap it up this week on The Lake Show, everyone. I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. Also, make sure you go out and vote. It's a very important election, probably the most important election of our lifetime, especially my lifetime. And also be looking out for those college football playoff rankings, the first one since we got into November. And once again, I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day. I'm your host, Dominic Licko. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up, it's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror